or two.
Yes, I will
We
do.
show you what
With
we
pleasure.
do, and we can find more things to do together.
Okay, pleasure. Yes, deal.
Deal.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. I welcome all of you to the session entitled Economic Recovery in Uncertain Times. I'm privileged to have four distinguished speakers. First of all, Professor Giulio Tremonti, the President of Foreign Affairs Committee in the Chamber of Deputies in Italy, and also the President of Aspen Institute. We also have Mr. Nasser Kamel, Ambassador Nasser Kamel, the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. I have Dr. Mohsen Derija, economist and former chairman of the Libyan Investment Authority. And I have Mrs. Fatou Haidera, managing director of UNIDO. And I have to say, it's always a pleasure to have another female on the panel. It freshens up the panel, let's put it this way. Okay. As the title of the session says, we are going to talk about the economic recovery. And this is actually a positive note, because most of the talk so far is about all the horrible things that are happening because of the Ukraine-Russian war. The entire world is in a problematic situation. The MENA region, the entire Mediterranean, north and south, everybody is there. These countries hardly recovered from COVID, okay? And the war started, and there are all sorts of problems related to the food situation, disruption in the supply change, possible risks of instabilities in different countries. Some countries are doing better than others, depending on their original situation before the problems, and depending also on whether they have oil, natural gas, or they don't. The purpose of today's session is to try and talk about how the recovery of all countries can be speeded up, okay? How can we push faster for sustainable development, and how we can mitigate the present negative impact and try to have less instability in the region. I'm going to start with Professor Giulio Tremonti, and I want to ask you specifically, based on your entire history and your entire background and your present position, I heard that there are certain suggestions that Italy has made even a long time ago to try and achieve a fairer trade in the world, better situation, one that is more fair for Africa, and where it's introducing things. Actually, they came beforehand, before all the crises that took place, but I think it would be very interesting to hear about them, because they are very relevant to the present situation and to our wish to recover from the present problems. So, please.
So, the G20 Bali leaders' declaration starts with these words. 14 years ago, the leaders of the G20 met for the first time, facing the most severe financial crisis in our generation. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to cooperate as we once again address serious global economic challenges. In 2008, and I remember very well that year, crisis was really dramatic, but it was not resolved. It was merely postponed, and in a quiet and artificial way. That is, by creating an enormous amount of artificial money. And empirical evidence in this regard, since then, the unit of account has changed from billion to trillion. This was because crisis was not, at that time, was not purely financial. It was the crisis of globalization itself. It was crisis, the starting of the crisis of globalization as a political model. Today, we see war and inflation. More deeply, it's emerging a clash of civilization, conflicts, commercial conflicts, risk of migrations, and famine, new pandemics, uncertainty about the future. In a war turning back to its post-medieval status of mundus furiosus. Another way to represent the present situation, you are traveling on the Titanic, you go to the bar, you ask a whiskey with ice, arrives the iceberg. Extraordinary times cannot be managed by ordinary thinking and means. And this is rightly was the political logic behind all the proposal. Global legal standard and the tax. I'm trying to speak on these issues. In 2009, within the G20, the Italian government drafted a multilateral treaty called Global Legal Standard. Political logic of this treaty was to move from free trade to fair trade. Global legal standard was discussed and voted on Paris by the General Assembly of the OECD. In Article 4 of that draft, I remember, the wording was respect for environmental and hygienic rules. It was in 2009. GLS proposal was bypassed by the so-called Financial Stability Board. Unluckily, in the following years, it was very difficult to see any degree of financial stability. It was, and it is the opposite. The present world is not global as before, nevertheless remains international, and an international world requires further regulation. As written by an ancient philosopher, Frédéric Bastiat, when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. The experience of history teaches, and I remember Bertolt Wurzer, that it's just just in times of crisis that it's easier to agree on regulation, so we must reinvent a new global legal standard. Another point, in 2001, in Europe, inside the ECOFIN, the alternative being discussed was between Tobin tax and D-tax. Tobin tax was taxation on financial international markets. D-tax was de-taxation in favor of poor countries, mainly Africa. If you buy a product in a shop that is part of a social network active in poor countries, mainly in Africa, and you sign yes, Europe or European nation states will renounce a small part of value-added tax on that product. €1 in Europe is equivalent to €1. It's a bigger and better number in poor countries or in Africa. This brings two positive effects. It increases the civil involvement of European societies. It's more successful than action taken by governments. Small action on the territory is more. I remember I wrote an article on these issues. Le Monde, unluckily, was the wrong day, September 11. From that time, another much worse history started. But I am confident that today, another and better history can start. In the logic of the so-called parliamentary diplomacy, the Italian Foreign Affairs Committee, together with the Foreign Affairs Ministry, we are working, and I hope with you as well, on these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your speech. I think there are two suggestions that were made here that are very interesting because they are very relevant, okay, and would help move from free trade to fair trade. One of them is the global legal standards. This is what his professor has been talking about, and the tax for the African goods. And it's good that somebody remembers Africa because Africa is in deep problem, especially these days with the climate, and they contribute only 3% to the emissions, and yet they bear the full cost. So thank you for remembering Africa. Thank you. And thank you. And I understand that you have to leave, so you are excused, and it's our loss. Let's give him another hand, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Now we move on to our three other speakers, and let me start with Ambassador Nasser Kamel, who's actually Egyptian and who has taken great positions in Egypt before being the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. And let me start by asking you, what can the Union for the Mediterranean do? What are, as far as the initiatives and the projects are concerned, how can they contribute to the mitigation of the negative impact of the present situation and reduce the instability in the region?
Thank you. Well, let me start by commenting on what you said on the panel. I'm a member of a pledge which is called No Woman, No Panel. So I will never participate in a panel where no women are participating.
Okay. Now that's a great starting point. I might give you extra time for
this. This is actually an Italian initiative. It's an Italian initiative that, as soon as it came out, and I'm imposing this at the level of the Union for the Mediterranean. So we do not participate in any panel that is male-dominated.
And you've got an extra minute because of this. You take it.
Well, let me start by answering or tackling the second part of the question, which is the instability that the region is facing, economically speaking. The Mediterranean, even before COVID and the war in Europe, is one of the most fragmented regions when it comes to economic integration because of the economic culture in some part of our region. When we look at the region at large, we see that economic development and economic cooperation is lacking to a certain extent. Infrastructure and interconnection between our countries, and even the trade frameworks that govern relation between our countries are not yet developed to a degree that will enhance a win-win situation for the country in the Mediterranean at large. This fragility has been compounded, of course, by the crisis, and I think you will be tackling this in your second part of this panel. And for that reason, the only logical answer to deal with the region fragility is through enhanced regional integration and through what we call in the UFM, and now it's becoming usually used by so many in the region, proximization of value chain or near-shoring of value chain. The crisis we're facing today in the world have shown the limitation of a globalized value chain system. I'm not saying that globalization is not here to stay, but I think from an environmental and also economic point of view, regionalization of value chain is extremely important. For this to happen, we need to create the necessary legal framework in terms of trade agreements, the necessary infrastructure framework in terms of interconnection and infrastructure for our countries to be able to trade together and to trade among themselves, and restructure our economy so they can be complementary to other neighboring countries and create together a successful economic bloc that could compete in a world that has been now dominated by Southeast Asia as a bloc, the North America free trade framework as a bloc. We at UFM are, and also I need to add a point that is related to environment. The more we integrate our economies and the more we focus on a regional value chain, we have what I call a 3 win-win-win situation. Because it's not only a win for the country working together and for the economy of those countries, it's also a win for the environment. Because the more we trade regionally, the less emission and the less carbon footprint we have in the world. As the Union for the Mediterranean is concerned, we're working on 2 or 3 different axes. The first one, of course, is trying to deal with the huge deficit in terms of unemployment. This is a region where 70% of the population south of the Mediterranean is under the age of 30, 50% in southern European country is under the age of 30. And unemployment is highest among this group and also within the women group in general. For that, we have launched a hub for job and trade within the UFM with a sizable budget. Will work in order to promote all the initiative on the ground that aims to create job in our member states. This hub is part of the Team Europe initiative, which is called Job Through Trade and Investment, that aims to enhance or at least impact the job market positively in our region. The other dimension of what we do is we are helping our member state understand the challenge they're facing and where they are doing better and where things are not going at the right pace. So we teamed up with the OECD to produce a periodical study on the situation regarding regional integration in the region in 4 main areas: finance, infrastructure, mobility, and services, to show to our member states where progress has been achieved and when lack of progress and why lack of progress we have, and give policy recommendation. Another thing to help also on the economic but also on the green and blue transition is with the EBRD. I'm just giving you some example. With EBRD and EIB, the European Investment Bank, and the European Commission, we're launching what we call a blue economy partnership, which will mobilize somewhere in between 1 to 1.5 billion euro in order to promote the blue economy along the Mediterranean coast in our member states, mainly focusing on renewable, on sustainable tourism, and also on preserving the Mediterranean Sea, which is one of the most polluted, unfortunately, sea in the world, facing so many environmental and biodiversity challenges.
You gave an excellent overview, surf through the activities that are being done, and they're all very impressive. And we'll come back to again to the climate and the triple win scenario. But let me ask you: you talked about the program that you have for having hub for job and trade and job creation for different countries. I'm wondering what you are doing for the vulnerable groups. Okay, and I'm talking about women and youth. If they're doing something there, and in general, how you see the international organization, what they should be doing to support these, because they are affected more than anybody else by any unfortunate situation.
You rightly said that women and youth are the most impacted, and unfortunately during crisis, we see that women are more impacted. COVID had a dramatic impact in terms of women access to jobs and economic opportunity, and women's role in the economy at large. And the same applies to youth to a certain extent. What this specific hub is actually focusing on women and youth, promoting entrepreneurship, but promoting also job creation for those 2 categories. Over and above, during our ministerial on women empowerment that we held in Madrid, and actually we had the pleasure of having you with us during that ministerial, our main focus was actually on the woman integration within the economy. Studies are showing if women in our region are fully integrated in the job market, our GDP could grow by 50%. This is not only an ethical and justice issue, it is a matter of economic
We have a study
growth.
in Egypt that showed actually exactly the same.
Exactly, because Egypt is part of that
30%.
of that larger scope. So minister in charge of that file agreed to lobby and work together to change even the legal framework within our member states in order to move towards what I would call positive discrimination in order to empower women economically in our region. Most of our grants, we have a grant called employment grant scheme, is actually solely directed at women and youth in our region. So most of our activity and most of our very limited financial resource are targeting those two groups specifically. And our policy recommendation to our member state is always hammering that point continuously.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be back again to talk about the climate, but I want, given that talking about females, I need to go to Mrs. Fatou Haidara, the managing director of UNIDO. And whenever we say UNIDO, we mean industry, we mean manufacturing, and manufacturing lies at the heart of any attempt by any country to achieve development. So if you just tell me briefly about how does UNIDO at this stage support sustainable, inclusive industrial development? And inclusive is important.
Thank you very much. Let me start first by saying that we are well aware of the diversity of the region. Economically, MENA region is diverse. Countries are at diverse stage of economic development. So whatever I will be saying here takes this into account. Will not take the risk to generalize the industrial performance of the MENA region. This being said, all countries, MENA and the world, is facing very challenging times. While we are recovering from economically from COVID, the conflict in Ukraine has exacerbated some of these challenges. Just a few figures. The oil barrel was $38 in 2021, and today is average 107. This is according to the World Bank. Another figure is the increase of food prices by 14%. So this gives you the idea of the challenge. Some countries will be facing food crisis coupled with the energy crisis. We heard this morning the statements by the presidents talking about climate change. So the world is a very difficult situation. And UNIDO's mission is to support countries to recover from the pandemic, to, as we say, to build back better, greener. So this is the work of UNIDO. We do it, let's say, at 3 levels. The first level is at the macroeconomic level. We support governments with the policies that are attractive to or encouraging local and foreign direct investment. We also support at the institutional level. This is a capacity building of the institutions to make them able to implement the policies, the strategies, and the roadmaps for industrialization. The third level is at the firm level, the enterprise level. And this is also, capacity building. We have technology transfer. You have entrepreneurship development, as the Secretary General just mentioned. So these are the 3 main level where we support countries. Having said that, because we are a specialized agency, let me be more concrete in what we do when we support countries to develop their industries. We all know that we are at the age of global value chains. So we help the countries to lay out the foundation so that they can enter into the global value chain. Another key strategy of ours is to ensure that SMEs have access to finance. That is also valid for intra-regional investment promotion and also the economic diversification. If we take the MENA region, I think one great opportunity is that because of the diversity, the rich countries in MENA region can invest back into the less developed countries. And this is something we encourage. Another point is, I mentioned that already, but the policy to allow private sector to flourish. This is also one measure that one would recommend, and this is what we are doing concretely in our member state countries, especially in the MENA region. Another point is we hear more and more digital transformation, Industry 4.0. That means we need to adapt, enterprise need to adapt to the advanced production system. We talk about smart production, digital technologies, and knowledge transfer and best practices. So these are some of the key intervention measures that we, as UNIDO, we support countries with to be more competitive or to build up the industrial foundation or the industrial sector. Another point is the quality infrastructure. To be competitive or to, we talk about globalization, products should fit the standards of the markets. So this is another area where we support the countries. We have also a very interesting, at the infrastructure level, we support the setting up of industrial parks, special economic zones in our member countries. I think all these help also to accelerate the youth creation of jobs for the young people and also, of course, for the women. When we were in Madrid, there was once very disturbing figure. In the MENA region, the women contribute only 19% in the workforce. But by involving women in the economic sphere, this will result with increased productivity, increased economic development. I have just one point, maybe I will stop there before we move to the other topic. Our last industrial development report found that the industrial sector was more resilient than other economic sectors during the pandemic. There is a reason to that, because the countries with industrial capabilities were less impacted, because with the advanced digital production, the movement of workers were not impacting negatively in the work. And also some firms, because of this flexibility, could move from, for example, in the chemical sector, to produce the protective equipments. They just changed the chain of production more easily than others due to their industrial capabilities. So this is also one interesting finding from our report. That means the importance of industrialization for countries. The countries that are industrialized are more resilient to shocks than countries who rely on commodities trading. Fair trade, yes. At the same time, if it's manufactured product that create more jobs for women, for youth, and it also increase more, I would say, more rapidly the GDP of countries. So these are some of the points concretely we do with countries. We have examples in the MENA region and in other parts of the world. Industrialization is the key. Thank you.
Each one of these points actually is a topic for an entire session. Okay, we'll come back to industrialization being the most important when we talk about the climate and the environment and the challenge that this is putting on Africa, as a matter of fact, for industrialization. But let me ask you a question. You talked about entrepreneurship and you talked about the private sector. Most of your work, UNIDO's work, is always done again through the ministries, through the government. So could you tell me a little bit more about how you incorporate the private sector and the entrepreneurship? How do you encourage these?
Well, thank you. Yes, at the origin, we as a UN organization, we work with governments. But as I mentioned just at the introduction, we work at 3 levels. We work also with the private sector. We have some concrete partnerships with private sector association. Our entry point with the private sector is capacity building, because when we talk about competitiveness of an economy, that means the productivity of the private sector, the competitiveness of the private sector. This can be ensured only if there is a partnership between the government and the private sector. This is why it's a realistic approach. I think this is what all governments have taken from pure public sector-driven economies. Now we move to partnerships between public and private sectors to achieve development. At our level, we have, I mentioned the technology transfer, entrepreneurship developments through concrete training, and also now we are talking about digitalization. We have also activities towards, we call it reskilling or upskilling, to make sure that the enterprises are competitive. So this is how we work with the private sector. Of course, we can talk a bit more in details about that, but this is what I could say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll be back to the extent that we have time for it. But let me move from the international organizations to the situation of a specific country, Libya. We have with us Dr. Mohsen Darija, former chairman of the Libyan Investment Authority, a very important authority, one that is typically accused of not taking the country forward or applauded for taking the country forward by making the right investments at the right time. But let me ask you first, Libya is in a very unfortunate situation with political divisions. And then on top of them, there were all the challenges that everybody else faced. They had their political divisions. Just at the beginning, briefly, what is the impact of the political divisions, plus COVID, plus war, on the economic situation right now in Libya?
Well, we can look at Libya as a globalization of politics problem as well. Libya is in a situation where for a long time, it was isolated from international events economically because it had healthy reserves and had small population and level of oil production and government expenditure were at a level where it can easily absorb shocks, international shocks. This has changed now with the political division poorly managed economic policy. And in addition, you have these shocks, which are unusual. The combination of COVID followed by the Ukraine war has led to a situation where, although usually Libya would benefit from higher oil prices, it is paying more in cost of imported goods, which Libya relies on very much. So the imported inflation has really taken away more or less all of the benefit that Libya should have had from the demand for energy. Usually, when you have a global recession, you'll have a decline in commodity prices, including oil, and that will impact on Libya's income. But in the current situation, you have recession plus high energy prices plus high inflation. This requires a unified country, unified institutions, and unified economic policy, which is not available for Libya. This, of course, has impacted on people with lower income, even middle income people have been impacted by the increased prices. And also there is also the element of growing population without growing private sector to absorb the demand for jobs in the economy, which has meant that the government is paying more and more salaries. It is not totally dark, because given a unified government, unified policy, it's relatively easy in Libya. It has the resources to change its economy, restructure it, and grow its private sector. There are hundreds of thousands of young people who come onto the job market at the moment, and there are no opportunities in the private sector. And there are no opportunities, real opportunities in government. And so these are absorbed in government roles where they cannot grow, they cannot develop. And this is a huge loss, because this is a human capital that is being lost on Libya, and a lot of energy that is being wasted as well.
And I'm sure there's a high percentage of women that are looking for jobs. Their chances are completely lost in comparison to the guys.
Yes, absolutely.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, they are in the same situation, but it's also
Always
worse for them because of the security situation. So it's doubly difficult for women. And there aren't really many mechanisms that deal with these problems in a special context, trying to rectify the situation. Although on the positive side, there are increasingly more women in leading roles. And I think it's very important, because they bring in the multitasking ability that men don't have.
Yes, yes.
And usually men deal with only one problem at the time.
Very, very glad that you recognize those.
I do, yeah.
Okay. Now, based on your experience in the investment authority, what do you see as the priorities for investment in Libya? I mean, if you were in charge right now for this authority, what would you ask for, irrespective of the conflicts? What would you do?
I think a key point in Libya is to grow the private sector. And so far, there are many issues with growing the private sector in Libya. There's a funding issue, there is a skills issue, there is loss, there's a real brain drain in Libya. I can name tens of promising young people who used to work with me, and they have all left the country and they're working outside, and there is no chance of bringing them back. Salary gap, work environment gap, development gap, all of these issues need to be addressed, and these issues cannot be addressed, unfortunately, with these short-term governments that we have been having, because you need a policy to work on all these issues simultaneously. So I think that the private sector is key for Libya, more than anything else. And the reason being is that the economy is not sustainable, even with high oil prices, when you have almost 85% of the population are in public sector jobs. And even people working in the private sector still keep public sector jobs for security. So developing the private sector is key, and that, of course, will mean developing the financial sector, developing the vocational training and educational sector to deal with that, opening new opportunities. And there are huge opportunities for development in Libya. There's no doubt about that. But that's where you start.
Libya is rich with oil, and oil is becoming a bad word with the climate condition. So we'll talk about the climate. I'll come back for you now with the being, the heart of the fossil fuel is oil. So what is going to happen with Libya? But let me go to Ambassador Nasser again and ask about your role in enhancing the climate resilience. We've just completed the COP27 in Cairo, and they extended the negotiations to try and reach conclusions. And then the end result was a loss and damage fund that was nice and sweet and everything, but the details of it were missing, which meant it cannot work, really. The criteria for who is going to take, how much money is in it, who's going to benefit, are not there. So there is still the talk about loss and damage, the talk about adaptation, the talk about resilience is still not mature enough. So UIM, what is the role that is playing in enhancing the climate resilience of the Med region?
Well, before we talk about what we do, we have to pinpoint to the specificity of that region again. Mm-hmm. We just happen to be a hot spot, the Mediterranean, of climate change. Our region, unfortunately, is warming 20% faster than the rest of the world. The Mediterranean temperature has risen by 4 degrees in the last 30 or 40 years. The water has risen by 6 or 7 centimeters, but we're talking about 20 centimeters in the next 20 years, and we can go up to a meter by 2100, which could affect the direct livelihood of 37 million Mediterranean living around our common sea. We've seen this summer, of course, the calamity in so many countries, including in Italy. I mean, northern Italy has declared water emergency. Northern Italy, not southern Italy. The fires in Greece, in Algeria, in France, and so many other areas. Having said so, this region that for reason beyond its own control, it's because of its own meteorological specificity, happens to be a hotspot, is also a region that has been very active and dynamic when it comes to dealing with mitigation and adaptation. We do tend to benefit better than other regions when it comes to climate finance and to accessing available funds in terms of adaptation and mitigation. The region, although the region or the membership of the UFM belongs to 3 different negotiating groups within the COP, but they happen to agree, even when they met at the ministerial level, they happen to agree on a very proactive and dynamic approach to the overall negotiation at the COP. I do not entirely agree with you that loss and damage was not as promising, because I think this is a very important step in the right direction.
It's not a complete package. This is what I mean.
Well, the COP has the history of introducing the concept and then finding the mechanism to put that concept into implementation. And the fact that the world accepted the concept of loss and damage is huge in terms of Africa, in terms of developing countries, and when we talk about climate justice. Especially we're dealing with loss and damage to the most affected area, island states, and the country most affected. We have seen what happened in Pakistan and Bangladesh last year. So this is a quantum leap when it comes to the world taking note and pledging to find a mechanism. The mechanism is not yet. Hopefully by COP28 we'll be able to structure that fund and implement measures in that term. So at the UFM, I mentioned already a very important initiative which is around 1.3, 1.5 billion on the blue economy, which is working on renewable energy and sustainable tourism, because we have 380 million tourists visiting our coast every single year, and that is very good for our economy, but very damaging to the environment. So supporting sustainable tourism is a huge priority for the UFM through that fund that I just spoke about. We are working on creating a similar fund when it comes to energy transition, because the Southern Mediterranean region can produce 100%, I repeat, 100% of all of Europe energy needs based on sun, wind, and hydrogen, and water, of course. If the necessary investment are in place and the infrastructure, because you cannot produce energy and be unable to transport it. And unfortunately, as we speak today, we have only 2 projects. One that will connect Morocco to Spain, and another one that will connect Egypt to Greece, electricity connection based on renewable. This would be renewable energy exported to Europe. If we do not invest more between Egypt and Italy, for example, and other, and reach a certain economy of scale, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, to create alliances, mobilize resources, find funds, so we can get into this, as I said, win-win-win, and this is, it would not be even a triple win. This would be because it will create jobs and employment. It will solve Europe energy dependency that has become extremely apparent with the war in Ukraine. It will even the economic playing field and give the Southern Mediterranean country a chance to develop economically in a very rapid way, and would provide Europe with the means to achieve its goal of neutrality and zero emission by 2030 and 2050.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive answer. Now, renewable energy is extremely important. We need to produce it in the Mediterranean. You have a chance of producing a lot, etc. But when we talk manufacturing, renewable energy is not the one that will achieve manufacturing. It's more the hydrogen. No, I'm talking to talking to.
Sure.
All right. So what is UNIDO doing? UNIDO is about manufacturing, and manufacturing is in trouble because we are not using fossil fuel anymore. So what are you doing about this? And I'm not talking about green production, and this has been going on for a while and will continue. I'm talking about the challenge of the climate and the fact that we are all pushing for renewable energy, correctly so. About what would this do for manufacturing? What is UNIDO trying to do about it? And let's have, we're having some issues with time, so because I think they reduced the time a little bit of the session, so please.
Okay, thank you. I will go very quickly. Environmental policies have been very prominent at COP27, and it will be the same at COP28. Transition, yes, from fossil fuels to greener energies or clean energy. Yes, but it's difficult. It will take time. It will not happen overnight. I was in a session not long ago where the Under-Secretary General for Africa was saying some countries talk about transition, some others are talking about access. Many countries don't have access to energy, and energy is key for industrialization. Without energy, no industrialization. But concretely, how UNIDO supports the industrial sector, we talk about industrial efficiency. The use of, that means the efficient use of water, efficient use of energy in manufacturing. This happened by supporting enterprises to have the right technologies to do so. And also, we support countries to promote low carbon sources of energy. We talk about renewable energy, you talk about green hydrogen as well. But the digital transformation and industrial policies, that's also facilitates by facilitating the integration of SMEs into the global value chain, help them in adapting to the climate change. Another key program of UNIDO is supporting to produce high value or value added goods and services that advance the competitiveness of countries despite the climate change related challenges. To summarize, we help in the area of efficiency, we help in the area of developing more green technologies for more green production. One point that I would like to also mention is that we have funds. We have funds where we support countries, but this is small. It's the 3-5 millions. That's not solve the problem. But we are partner with bigger funds, the GEF, GCF, for the adaptation, for the mitigation. Actually, whatever we do in the area of industrialization to support our member countries, we do it in partnerships. You heard the many challenges. One partner cannot do it. We have to be
Everybody has to be together.
many around the table to support the countries. So our interventions are very concrete, and we have examples in many countries in the MENA region, in elsewhere in this area. Thank you.
In our last minute, very quickly, for each one of you, a very quick question. What would be the top priority thing that is needed at this point with the situation of the world, from where you are? Libya.
Renewable energy production. I think it's crucial to expand that, and it's crucial to rely less on fossil fuel. The fossil fuel will be with us for many years to come, but its use should be less in producing energy, more in producing manufactured material.
On top of renewable energy, which is really a priority, nearshoring, meaning creating a regional value chain that would be beneficial for the region.
Absolutely.
And has an impact on the environment and climate change.
Thank you.
I will take from the Secretary General to say that we need to ensure the competitiveness of the economies through the medium and medium enterprises. That's very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. It's cooperation. I'm challenging with the time here. You have to see the time from where I am. So it's cooperation, it's international dialogue for everybody, it's the 4 winds, it's the nearshoring, it's the renewable energies, and small enterprises, women.
And
Thank you very
women.
much. Bye.